Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I am Uranio Paes.
And we're very happy you joined us for our first episode of Enneagram 2.0.
Yes, our inaugural podcast. I'm very excited, Bea. What about you?
Yes, I'm really glad that we're launching this new venture to bring more Enneagram out into the world.
Yeah, and we definitely hope that we'll benefit and enjoy or experience your Enneagram 2.0 experience.
Our intention is to talk in this podcast a little bit about ourselves, to introduce ourselves to you if you don't know us very well yet, our work with the Enneagram, and the content we're going to be presenting in the coming weeks.
This is why we're calling it our number 0. And let's get started then.
Yes. I know when I'm first meeting someone in the Enneagram world, I always like to hear how they first came to the Enneagram, how they discovered it, and what their experience was. So maybe we could both share our origin stories.
Okay.
I know that both of us have been studying the Enneagram for a pretty long time.
Mm-hmm.
I learned the Enneagram in 1990, and I think you learned it pretty shortly after that, right?
Like 1996, actually.
Right. So how did you first encounter the Enneagram?
Well, I had a student of mine because I was already working as a organizational consultant by then. A student of mine in Brazil, because I am Brazilian and I come from São Paulo, but I was teaching actually in Rio de Janeiro at that time, and a student of mine just commented that she worked with the Enneagram because I was talking about styles and personalities using some other system, which is not very well known. So she said that, and I got interested in the things that she said, and I went to read, a few books. The first book I read was Helen Palmer's, which was in Portuguese, my original language. So excuse my English, by the way. I think we're going to do a few funny things like Bea correcting my English while we talk here on the podcast, right, Bea?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I got to know it through that student, and then through a book, and then through workshops, local workshops, through a very good teacher in Brazil, Racili, and then eventually, started studying quite a lot of it and reading, which has to do with my Enneagram type and subtype, while I was just starting teaching it in a few places. Mm-hmm. Especially in business, because I come from this business and management background.
And did you know right away that you were a 5?
In my case, yes.
Actually, it was pretty obvious,
eh? Yeah, actually that student that I first talked about the Enneagram to told me that about 5, and then I said, I think this is me. And then when I read the first book, Helen's book, I was like really surprised. That one of the reactions people sometimes have is, does this author know me? Right?
Yes. How did this person get inside my head?
Yeah, and my heart and everything. So I was, pretty shocked with what I read. And it was very obvious to me from the beginning that the Enneagram talked about something truer than what other models talked about. I actually felt ashamed that I had been using that other model that I was teaching. What about you, Bea? What's your story?
So I came upon the Enneagram kind of by accident. A good friend of mine from junior high and high school, his father was one of the first Enneagram pioneers.
Yeah, who became a very beloved teacher for you and me.
Yes, both of us were mentored by David Daniels, Dr. David Daniels, who was a psychiatrist at Stanford. And I was just at dinner one night at the Daniels house, and Dr. Daniels was sharing his passion about the Enneagram. He described it as his life's calling, which was a little bit unusual for a Stanford psychiatrist to be interested in something at that time relatively unknown, something called the Enneagram, this ancient symbol. But he said he thought it was by far the best growth tool that he'd ever encountered. And so that got my attention right there. And I took Helen Palmer's book home with me, and he had suggested I might be a 2. So I read the type 2 chapter, and like you, I was absolutely shocked at how accurately it described me. All these details about who I was, it was right there in very clear terms. Even things that I didn't really like about myself that I probably wouldn't have admitted were right there in black and white. And
did you admit them right away?
Well, I had to think about it a little bit while. It took a little bit of work in self-encouragement to admit them to myself, but it was incredible. I immediately saw how helpful it was, because it was almost as if it helped me see blind spots and parts of myself I really didn't want to see and own, in a way that was very good for me to admit.
In my case, it's not that I didn't admit, but actually I was more intellectualizing what I was reading. You're a 2 and I'm a 5 on the Enneagram. So it's similar to your process of admitting, just slowly.
Yes. And I think it's really important to say, maybe right up front, that when you do find your Enneagram type, it's not always a completely positive experience, right?
If it's taught the right way.
Exactly. If you're being really honest, if you're really finding your type, it shouldn't be 100% good news, right?
Yes, exactly.
And a friend of mine calls it the ick factor. It's kind of hard and vulnerable to read certain things about yourself that maybe are things that are in your shadow, the part of you that you don't fully want to recognize in yourself, because it doesn't make you feel so good.
Yes. And I'm so happy, Bea, that the newer generations nowadays are more open to this kind of approach of looking inside and going a little deeper.
I do think that there's a real hunger these days for people to gain more self-knowledge. And I think that's part of why the Enneagram is really exploding in popularity.
Yes, right now, yeah.
Definitely in the U.S., but I think in some ways are all around the
Several
world.
other places. Like we are right now recording this very first podcast in Egypt, Cairo, one of the cities we teach in. We teach all over the world, so it's so exciting to see and witness how this is happening.
Yes, and I think Egypt is a good example of a place in which, just in the last few years, there's been a huge increase in Enneagram work, and different teachers coming here to share ideas. And in fact, one of the things, we've met so many different people here. And so it's a great example of how in different places all over the world, the real Enneagram's really catching on, which is another reason why I'm so glad we're doing this podcast, because I think we can speak more about our intentions, but I know that for us, it's really about sharing our work, sharing our views on the Enneagram, helping people take whatever Enneagram studies they may be doing to a deeper level.
Yeah, I think nobody wants anymore more of the same.
Right.
And people study and get information of all kinds right now through the internet and different channels. So this is one of our objectives, I guess, here on Enneagram 2.0 podcast. It's not to do more of the same. It's to bring in some very interesting discussions, sometimes controversial topics, and to make people think about themselves, not only in positive ways, but we also want to have fun, right?
Exactly. And I think it's for us, and one of the things that's great about the fact that we work together is I think we're so aligned around Enneagram theory and high quality Enneagram work, and making sure we're always applying the Enneagram in ethical ways and ways that really work. But that we're also very complementary in our skill sets and our personalities and our experience. And so I think that we share really a sense of mission around helping really high quality Enneagram teachings be communicated to more people. Because I think the Enneagram can actually be a little bit dangerous, right? When people use it in ways, and sometimes completely unintentionally, they get excited about the Enneagram, and they may not recognize, they just may not know when they're taking a shallow approach, or you know,
reproducing some old concepts that came from, books that are not updated, or not understanding really what each of the 9 types are about.
Right.
Is about.
Yes. And there's so many dimensions to the system. There are centers of intelligence, there are the types, of course, there are subtypes and instincts, and the what the diagram says about growth itself, like the arrow lines and the wings.
And it's all about transformation, not only,
Yes.
just talking about our personalities.
Exactly.
It's, when we study the 9 personalities, we study more who we are not, and then who we can become, right? And this has to do with psychological and spiritual development, which many people are interested in right now, given the things that happen in the planet.
Exactly. And I think both of us agree that the Enneagram is all about growth and transformation. That you need good information about the Enneagram as a map, but the information is not necessarily important in and of itself. It's vital to the degree that you apply it in your life and that you use the tool for transformation.
Right. And
not as an excuse or something like that, like, oh well, I'm a 2 and so I do it this way. It's like, no, you're a 2 and you need to learn about the way you are so that you can develop much beyond that, because as we know, we are not our personalities. We're much more than our personalities, but we identify with our personalities.
Yeah. And sometimes we justify what we do with our personality. Or I can look at you and say, you're doing this because you're a 2.
Right.
Like accusations.
Yes, exactly.
It's the same. Yeah.
Right. So what we want to be all about is helping people understand the Enneagram and how to apply it, both in terms of cutting edge theory. I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is how, that there's so much to the Enneagram. There's so much encoded in it, and we're really evolving our understanding of it right now. Right. I think we only really understand a very small percentage of all that the Enneagram contains. And so part of what we're dedicated to is the continual unfolding of new information, of ways to understand what is communicated by the Enneagram in ways that are usable and accessible to support growth and development.
Yes, exactly. And it's an ongoing exploration. And yet it feels like, so much has already been revealed with what we have studied so far. And I want to mention, Bea, that when we decided to call this the Enneagram 2.0 podcast, and also we have a workshop or a retreat called the same way, this is because we see that as the upgrade of what you and I used to do many, many years ago. Like, we need to get really updated in new theories and in new ways of teaching. And I don't know you, but on one hand, I'm very happy that the Enneagram is spreading around the way it is. But also a little concerned at times with things I read on the internet, mainly, and in social networks, because at times people don't really know what they are talking about.
Right, exactly. So in part, we may be here to correct the record at times, right? And to challenge some ideas that we may view as shallow. And to that end, I think our intention is to always be very respectful.
It's not about people.
It's not about people. It's not about not respecting other people and that everyone has a right to their opinion. But in light of some of the opinions that get put out there, and sometimes in a very authoritative tone, we're here to present our views, to challenge views, and again, always with intention to promote the best possible use of the Enneagram, never to say that we're the owners of the truth,
Yeah.
never to criticize anyone else. That's never going to be our intention. But we do want to say when we think there's one approach that works better than another approach.
Yeah, that's our opinion and our experience. We're not saying, as you said, that we are owners of the truth. And at the same time, I think we have a duty to the Enneagram. And when I say we, it's all teachers, to bring in, what we really think about and contrast, compare, because we are here for the sake of something bigger than us. The Enneagram at times just feels like a heritage of humanity and an unfolding thing, and not exactly an invention, but rather a discovery of bigger truth.
Right. And you said the responsibility of Enneagram teachers, which I think is large. And I think a big part of that responsibility is also walking the talk. So in other words, if you're someone who teaches the Enneagram or someone who takes an active role in promoting the Enneagram, it's very important that you be using it on yourself, right? And I know that you and I are dedicated to that, and we will be using ourselves as examples and telling about our own work.
Yeah, and our relationship as friends and co-teachers.
Exactly,
Yes.
which is also a source of learning.
Always.
But I also want to mention, I think, the responsibility of Enneagram enthusiasts, because I think we also want to suggest that Enneagram enthusiasts have a responsibility to be looking at the sources of the Enneagram information they're getting and talking about. And always, if they're dedicated to the Enneagram, to really be understanding what the information is they're getting, where it comes from, so that they can also play a role in encouraging the best possible uses of the Enneagram.
And honoring the system that is not only deep and useful, but also sacred. Now, on the other hand, you and I are not at all against spreading the word and making it more popular.
That's right.
And reaching out to all audiences.
Right, and that's happening in such exciting ways today. I mean, a lot of people who follow people on Instagram, people are talking about it in very innovative ways, like songs that are being written about the Enneagram. To me, I think it's wonderful to see that. But I wonder if, especially if people are new to the Enneagram listening to this podcast, I wonder if it would be good to talk a little bit about what we see as the purpose of the Enneagram, or how the Enneagram can really help people. Like, why be interested in the Enneagram?
What do you think?
Well, I think that the Enneagram of personality has ancient roots. That's my opinion. Not everyone shares it, but I think it comes from... Well, we don't really know where it comes from, but it's probably thousands of years old. Yeah. I believe it came through Egypt, which is one of the reasons it's exciting to be here and to be coming here a couple of times a year, every year.
Teaching with our friend Abdul Rahman.
Yes. And it's very old, it's very ancient, it has deep roots in, I think, some of the world's most treasured and most wise philosophic traditions, wisdom traditions. But I think it's probably the best tool available for really helping people wake up. And a lot of the core teaching behind the Enneagram that comes from, say, Gurdjieff, who was an Armenian mystic that lived at the beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th century, and who taught us a lot of what we know about the meaning of the Enneagram symbol itself, and a program of self-work connected to it, and which we'll be referencing as we go forward and hopefully clarifying for people. I think one of the things that it's always important to remember is that in a way we are asleep. It's just part of the human condition that we think we're awake and conscious as we go through our lives, but actually we live in a kind of waking sleep. We have kind of mechanical habits. We're machines, as Gurdjieff said, but we're special machines because we're machines that can wake up and realize that we're machines, which is part of the human purpose, I believe, is awakening to our higher capacities. And I think the Enneagram helps us see that in ways that no other tool I can think of really does in quite the way it does.
Yeah. And Gurdjieff would call the nine personalities as man-machine states of the heart and the mind, uh, ways that we have limited ourselves to a much bigger spectrum of life and possibilities. He would talk about the possible evolution for man, but the very first one is to become human. And then, after becoming human, we need to become spiritual, right? Now, I do think, B, that it's totally possible to have a sound and deep inner development without the Enneagram. I think that many people do it when people do very good level psychotherapy and also spiritual work. Now, why the Enneagram is useful? I think it, as Helen Palmer used to say, or says still, it names the main obstacles for us to get there. And I see that it serves as a tremendously useful shortcut in our quest. This sacred work of inner work is the most difficult one of all, and it takes a lot of time, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime is not enough. If we don't get shortcuts, we won't get too far.
Yes, I'm a psychotherapist by training. I worked with the Enneagram for a long time as a psychotherapist. And if you think about someone who starts a journey of trying to understand themselves at a deeper level, it's like, where do you start? Even if you're smart enough to go to therapy, to start, being supported in your process of self-development, it can take a while to find, okay, how do I go from what I'm experiencing in my daily life to the really important key things that I need to be paying attention to, that I need to understand about myself to really grow. And I think the Enneagram just shines a light on habitual patterns that tend to be invisible because they started early on as a coping strategy in childhood, and they become so familiar and comfortable and so habitual that it's like the air we breathe. We just don't see it, and we don't realize that other people have other worldviews completely different than ours, which is why we can sometimes think, why is that person seeing this thing so differently than I am? And I think the Enneagram provides an incredible guide to helping you understand, here are the patterns that you've gone to sleep to, which function a bit like a kind of programming. It's like you're programmed in certain ways, and it's your programming, so you don't see the programming and you don't recognize that you operate according to kind of a default mode, and that what you really need is to understand more that that's what's happening, and that that default mode is a kind of self-limiting system, and that you're limited in ways that you don't see. But once you see that, and the Enneagram helps you see that, you can grow much beyond that.
Yes. So I definitely agree with all you've just said. I think it's something so beautiful to see how people start their journeys inside. When they get to know the Enneagram, I think it's a very good start because of its very big precision, accuracy, and also depth. Now, I also see how much it helps people who have already been on a path. And when they get to the Enneagram, they focus more. So the Enneagram is a way to know what comes next in our development in general, but also per type. We have 9 types on the Enneagram. Enneagram actually the word comes from the Greek. Ennea is 9, and gram is drawing or symbol. So the symbol of 9. And you mentioned Gurdjieff. One of the things I'm really excited about is our studies to try to combine the more ancient Enneagram of the process Enneagram, as we talk about, with the personality typology that most people know about nowadays.
Yes.
And these are 2 very important dimensions of the Enneagram that have been put apart. It actually disturbs me that people who know the 9 types don't go study Gurdjieff and all the brilliant work he did. or simply don't know enough. And while many Gurdjieffians, so to say, are against the typology, thinking it could never work. And it's like, I don't know it and I don't like it much, you know?
Yes, exactly. And so I think that's one of the things that we're really going to focus on doing a lot, is talking not only about the 9 types and the subtypes and the different aspects of the personality Enneagram, but also talking about the Enneagram symbol itself. Gurdjieff said it was a symbol of perpetual motion. He said if you know how to read the Enneagram, and of course almost no one does today, it makes books and libraries entirely unnecessary.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And he said it's the symbol of all and everything.
Right. So we'll be exploring that as well. We'll be exploring all the different dimensions of the Enneagram that help people understand the symbol and what makes it such an effective and powerful system, and also the specifics of the Enneagram types and subtypes and why people do what they do.
Yeah, and at the same time, we will be very practical and talk about very interesting things, mainly relationships and, you know, how those 9 types play out in the world for each of us.
Let's do a short break.
If you like this podcast, visit www.cpenneagram.com for much more great Enneagram content.
The Enneagram 2.0 podcast goes live every other Thursday on all main platforms. Stay tuned to learn more about yourself and others.
Have you already subscribed for Bea and Uranio's YouTube channel? Go to YouTube and search for Chestnut Paes and click on like and subscribe.
This is the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I wonder if it would be good to share a little bit more about our backgrounds and especially how that's led us to the work that we do today with the Enneagram through our Enneagram School, the Chestnut Paes Enneagram Academy, and our online platform, Chestnut Paes Online, just so people know a little bit about who we are, just so the person listening can understand where we're coming from and what experience we're drawing from that we'll be speaking about in this podcast.
Right. So you said you're a psychotherapist, and I come from business and management backgrounds. Now I worked as an organizational consultant for 25 years in my life, but the Enneagram pretty soon became really central in all I did. I started studying it more than anything else, and then I went to the US, started studying with the authors I used to read, and eventually I was working only with it as an organizational consultant. Then I started teaching, Palmer Daniels trainings and other trainings of myself that I started developing, things that started unfolding sometimes intuitively, and connecting the dots and different things that I was getting in touch with, because together with the Enneagram I started my inner quest in different wisdom schools. I stayed for quite a while in a school doing different kinds of meditations. Then I was a student at a Gurdjieffian school. Then I spent a few years also doing Sufi studies. So it's always been something connected to deep work with me. Now, I do think that that led me to be in partnership with you, because we have a very similar vision that this is all about transformation. And on Chestnut Paes Enneagram Academy, we are all about that. So I think that in different ways, you and I we don't really want to do workshops or retreats. We want to do processes of development to facilitate our students' development.
Well, we do want to do workshops and retreats.
Yeah, what I mean is not only something
yes.
lost in time in one period. It's
Yes.
just processes of development, and this is why we have created our new school, in which we teach together, bringing together different contributions that you and I have. And we have what we call the personal mastery program and the professional certification program, with different retreats and workshops together, but also with colleagues of ours who do coaching and mentoring individually and different kinds of studies.
Yes, I think to say it in a phrase, I think we're very dedicated to helping people take their Enneagram work to a deeper level personally, and also helping professionals who teach the Enneagram, who use the Enneagram in whatever professional practice they have, often therapists or coaches, leaders, people who work in HR organizations, to take their Enneagram work to a deeper level. So
it's a lot about the next step at the next level.
Right. And I started off actually in academics, and then because of the Enneagram, I decided to go back to school and study psychology and become a psychotherapist. So I knew the Enneagram before I learned psychology, and I saw everything I learned through the lens of the Enneagram. And I came to see the Enneagram as almost a grand theory of psychological and spiritual development. And after becoming a psychotherapist, I gradually kind of migrated toward doing more coaching and business consulting. So you and I share that part of our background, although you were a organization development consultant for many more years than I was. But then gradually started doing more workshops, especially after I wrote my first book, The Complete Enneagram, and then the second book, The 9 Types of Leadership. And so now I'm just really thrilled to be doing more and more of this deeper work with people, both just in their personal lives, helping them understand themselves at a deeper level, helping them further their growth journeys, but also helping therapists, coaches, and other kinds of professionals learn to use the Enneagram with more skill and confidence. And so, that's what we're deeply dedicated to. And I think another thing that we are also doing at the same time, which supports all that, is developing more Enneagram content, really developing the theory. And I think sometimes, because the Enneagram hasn't really been an academic discipline, sometimes what's happened in my experience, and you tell me what you think, is that, there's a good teacher out there, or people develop a piece of theory and they just kind of stick with it. They've got a good course, and they're having good experiences with people coming to their classes, and they just sort of stay there because, again, it's not really an academic discipline. It's not always about moving things forward. It's more about like, okay, I'm doing something that's working, let's stick with this. Whereas I think we come with a real developmental mindset when it comes to the work itself, the use of the Enneagram to further inner work, which is what we're all about. And so I think that's part of what we'll be doing, is really focusing a lot on how to apply the Enneagram in new ways, if those new ways work better, how to understand the Enneagram symbol itself, the types, the subtypes, the instincts, how everything fits together, and really challenging maybe old ideas that we might think are outmoded, or just that there's better ways and better approaches. And because after all, the Enneagram map is only as good as it is when it's applied. It's not just about description or diagnosis. It's about using it in practical ways to transcend your personality, to manifest your higher potentials, to really develop higher consciousness.
Yeah, that's what it is about. And sometimes I think you here who's listening to us now will see us discussing aspects in theory. Not necessarily we will be in total agreement, although we agree pretty much in the vast majority of things at this point. But Bea and I try to stay being explorers of this system. And I think that conferences that exist everywhere help. Enneagram conferences wherein people and teachers share knowledge. But I'm particularly excited with the possibility of the internet becoming a channel for good exchanges and not only shallow things that we sometimes see more. Now, I think it's useful also to say, when it comes to our biography, that both you and I were board members at the International Enneagram Association, actually for 6 years, and together we got to know each other.
That's how we met.
Actually, you became president for 2 years, and I was also global presidents for other 2 years. And we had an opportunity to see how the Enneagram could grow all around. Now, as I said, I am from Brazil, from São Paulo. Although right now I live in London with my wife and kids since 2016. And you are from?
San Francisco.
You were born in Palo Alto, though.
I was born in Palo Alto. I live in California. I've lived in California most of my life. And so, yeah, I'm from the United States.
So, and it seems that you actually attended the Enneagram conferences from the very first one.
Yeah, there was the first real Enneagram conference happened in 1994, and I was there for that. So I've been around the community for a long time, and I think what's really one of the things that I think we feel really strongly about is creating a sense of community. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast, and one of the things we try to do in our work, certainly with our Enneagram school. So I think that, you know, we've developed a real friendship through our dedication to the Enneagram and through our common vision of using it to promote greater awareness in the world.
Yeah, and it feels great that we are not just business partners and co-teachers, but we are also friends.
Yes.
And first friends.
And I think that we share a very key value in using the Enneagram for our own personal growth. And so we will be using examples from our own life, certainly, partly sometimes because they're just probably the most vivid examples because we're living them, but also from our friendship and our business partnership.
Right.
And so I think that will be an ingredient going forward in the podcast.
And this doesn't mean that you and I are evolved or totally evolved.
No,
we have
far
our
from
flaws,
it.
And,
Far from it.
Maybe we'll help our audience here at this of this podcast by sharing a little bit of our flaws.
Yes, or a lot. And again, I think the Enneagram, more than anything else, is helpful in looking at the shadow, which can't always be easy. But
Do you have shadows, Bea?
Oh, me? Yes, of course.
And do you think I have shadows?
I think we all have shadows, but it helps to.
I do a lot.
It helps if we're looking at them together with each other, because then we know we're not alone.
We cannot do this work alone, as Gurdjieff said, and having other people giving us feedback and even groups, self-development groups, is very, very useful, sometimes essential.
So why don't we say a little bit about our vision for the podcast and maybe preview some upcoming topics?
What is your vision for our podcast, Beatrice Chestnut?
Well, I think it's a way of taking the work that we're doing in workshops and retreats and in, the online content that we're developing, and communicating it in a different way to hopefully a wider audience, and having some interesting discussions about Enneagram theory, Enneagram applications, about how to understand this remarkable system. We'll also have some interviews with some thought leaders in the Enneagram world, and we'll talk about, I think, some really interesting topics. Before we get to the topics, what's your vision? What would you add to what I'm saying?
I'd say it's our contribution to engage more interesting people on the whole discussion about self-development using the Enneagram. And then, as you mentioned now and a little before, we have Chestnut Paes Online, CP Online, that came from another project, Mundo Enneagrama. And that is an online platform with lots of content that people might want to check out. Yeah, thanks for correcting my English.
You know, I'm always hesitant to correct your English because it seems a little bit like I'm being critical, and I'm in awe of you because you speak three languages and I only speak one language. So,
but yet you have fun at times listening to me.
Well, I do. I do find it a little bit entertaining the way you phrase things, but I find it kind of cute, and so that's another reason it's hard to correct you because.
But I really appreciate if you do because I like learning as a social file.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But back to CP Online, we have a lot of content in there, both by you and by me, so that is our way to build community and to bring people together to deep learning. But it all starts with this podcast and also our YouTube channel with several introductory materials, although this podcast is both for beginners and for more advanced students.
Yeah, our goal is to have conversations with each other, with other people that are engaging and enlivening and that really deepen people's interest in the Enneagram and help them take what they're doing to a deeper level. So some of the upcoming topics that we might cover, I think we're going to start off with some of the basics of Enneagram theory in case people are learning the Enneagram through this podcast for the first time or they're new to the Enneagram. But again, we'll always be trying to do it in a way where we're adding something new or we're adding more depth. But we'll start off talking about the 3 centers of intelligence, the fact that we're 3-brained beings, and we'll talk about the 9 types, and then we'll talk about the instinct level of personality, and we'll talk about the subtypes. We'll talk about relationships, like how the Enneagram can really help improve your relationship, and we all want that to happen. We all want better relationships. And we'll talk about the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs, which I know a lot of people are interested in. What other kinds of things will we share with people?
I think different applications, in life, at work, and also the dimension of essence, our higher selves, and who we really are when we just lower down the energy of personality itself.
Yes, that's one of the things you've taught me is that when we really develop and we really grow, we're actually the opposite of who we are in personality, which is why I think some of the stereotypes that get developed around the Enneagram types can be a bit dangerous because it's almost like it locks people in to a lower level of consciousness. And it can discourage real growth, that when people start to change, they actually become very different. Of course, change can be difficult, but it's definitely very possible, especially when you're using the Enneagram map in the way it can be used.
And this is why you and I have our model of levels of awareness as something very central.
And that's very new that we'll be sharing at some point soon.
Yes.
Because I think people will be very excited about that. It's based on the Enneagram itself. We're going to end each podcast with a top 5 list. And you and I, this was your idea, your brainchild. So why don't you describe what the top 5 is? And then we'll do our top 5 for today.
Yeah, so top 5. Top 5 for us, is a way to share ideas of top 5 anything Enneagram. So we might want to say the happiest types or subtypes, or the ones who are more have more melancholy or
anger.
Yeah, we'll talk. We'll have a top 5 for each podcast. But and then the idea, because I like to tease you, as you know, you like order, planning, and I'm not as much like that.
He loves to spring things on me right in the moment when I'm least expecting it.
And this is because of our instinct and subtypes, not our types, as we'll share some other time. Now, this is why I suggested that we don't talk about what we think the top 5 is. We agree beforehand on a theme, a top 5 theme, and then you think about it, I think about it, and then we contrast live. So right now, I don't know what your answers are about the top 5, but what is the top 5 today, Bea?
And I don't know what your answers are either. So today, we are going to talk about the top 5 things that excite us about this podcast.
Good.
The top 5 reasons we're excited about launching this new podcast, Enneagram 2.0.
Yeah.
So do you want to go first or should I?
I think you could go first. So what is 5 for you?
So number 5 for me is that I love talking about the Enneagram. I could talk about it really all day. Sometimes people ask me about the Enneagram at parties and then they apologize immediately saying, oh, you probably don't want to talk about the Enneagram. You talk about that all the time. And then I immediately say, actually, I could talk about the Enneagram all day and not get tired of it. So I love talking about the Enneagram.
Yeah, good enough.
What about you? What's your number 5?
My number 5 is that doing this podcast is a cool new thing for me. You know, I'm learning some technology aspects of it and different things while I talk with you. So it's about learning, and learning is one of the most important things in my life. I don't know why. Why do you think?
Because you're a social 5.
Okay.
Yes.
So what's number 4 for you? Bea?
Number 4 is that it's another way to express my passion and my very deep dedication to personal growth work. It's a way to reach more people, to wake up more people, and basically to promote higher consciousness in the world, which is kind of what I see maybe as my higher mission. Is that if each of us individually is making an effort to have higher consciousness, to become more self-aware, it makes the whole world more conscious.
Love it. My number 4 is that through the podcast, it becomes more possible to spread the word of the Enneagram all around the world because you and I decided to be really international and teach in all continents, as we are doing right now already, but also spreading the word of the Enneagram in different facets of this system. Different aspects and dimensions of it. It really excites me.
Yes, that's a good one.
Number 3.
Number 3. So I'm excited to share some of what we do and what we're learning from doing our live workshops and retreats. Recently, I realized a lot of what we do in trying to help people use the Enneagram in their personal growth when we work with people directly in person is we're really often healing traumas. We're helping people understand how their Enneagram type as a defensive structure has really helped them cope and survive, but also has shielded them from really addressing some traumas, and that if they can really face some of their core wounds and difficulties, they can experience enormous healing and liberation. They can really have less stress and anxiety in their lives, and all the different things that we've learned about the Enneagram and the human growth process. I'm excited to bring that to a wider audience and help people see just all the different things that the Enneagram can do as a tool.
Right, yeah, well put. My number 3 is that I'm doing this with you, Bea. It's fun, and it's much nicer to do it with you than alone.
Oh, that's only number 3? You see how this might get us in trouble?
Okay, I guess I now know what's 2 or 1 for you.
And we'll talk about that later.
But it's top 3, see? For me, it's really exciting that I'm doing this with you.
Okay, yeah.
What's your number 2?
I might get mad at you when I get to my number 1, though.
Oh my.
Okay, for me, number 2 is I'm excited about building a wider community. One of the things I love about the Enneagram is that I meet amazing people through the Enneagram at conferences, definitely. And people that come to our workshops and trainings, and just people who love the Enneagram are usually people who are really interesting and very deep and just dedicated to their own growth and development. And so I'm always excited about people I meet, and I'm really happy to be building a wider community of people who are studying Enneagram in really positive ways.
Well, yes. And for me, my number 2 is that it feels like we are doing something good for the planet today. The planet is so much in need, and dedicating some time to do this and using this amazing system that the Enneagram is makes me feel good and like doing a little part in that we can do.
Right. So my number 1.
I'm a little scared.
Well, I'm not offended that you put the planet above me. That's okay. But my number 1 is that I love talking to you.
Aww,
and I love working with you, and I love partnering with you in this important work we do. And so I think it's going to be fun for us to have very focused conversations on important things we want to share with people.
I love it, Juby. Yeah, it will be a pleasure, as it is a big pleasure to teach together with you. We have a lot of fun, and we have so many stories to tell. Not all of them we can talk about,
and some that are a little painful.
Yes,
but it's all about the growth journey.
Exactly. And my number 1, it's something I've been learning. In the past, I would switch my number 1 and 2. So even more important than the planet to me is an individual inner transformation for you who's listening to us. But in a way that we talk Enneagram of transformation and not the Enneagram of labeling people in whatever personality they have.
Right.
This is what excites me the most. Sharing with people how the Enneagram is a developmental tool, and sometimes we say it's not only horizontal, it's also vertical in levels of awareness, and how this can be our life's work, the work, as Gurdjieff used to say, right. Inner transformation. And always the very best thing each of us can do for the planet is our very own inner work.
Right, and I think we're going to bring new ideas to you listening about how exactly to do this inner work, and hopefully new ideas, new examples, new applications, and it is about the work, and it does start with you. So when each of us are doing our work, it has a way of inspiring all the people around us. So I like that one, and I won't be offended that you put the planet and the listener.
Thank you. You're doing your work by saying this.
Yes, and I'm working on the pride of the 2 of not having to be number 1.
Yes, and now you made me think if I'm still too much in my abstractions as the social planner.
See how everything is material for the inner growth process.
Yes.
Even the top 5.
So this is why I can't wait for the next podcast, Bean.
Yes. Okay, so that does it for this podcast, and we're really glad you joined us. We're very excited to be starting this new endeavor, and we hope you join us for our coming episodes. So this has been the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
I am Uranio Paes.
Join us again next time as we talk about all things Enneagram.
Thank you for listening.